The Trump administration is again taking aim at Harvard University. Education Secretary Linda McMahon sent a letter to Harvard on Monday telling the university it will no longer be eligible for new research grants from the federal government. In response, Harvard accused the administration of doubling down on its attempts to control the university. Harvard has already sued the Trump administration after it paused $2 billion in existing funding. Joining us to discuss, Brett Samuels, White House reporter here at The Hill. Brett, thanks for hopping on. So a week ago, Harvard said it had done these internal reviews and was going to make reforms, getting at some of the issues McMahon calls out in her letter: anti-Semitism on campus, broadening ideological diversity. So why is the Trump administration going back after Harvard?
Yeah, Drew, certainly the administration is clearly making an example out of Harvard. I think this is a case of the White House and the Trump administration sort of, picking a fight with an elite institution. It's sort of a piece with what we've seen so far from the administration, where they are sort of going after these institutions like Harvard, like Columbia University, and essentially, cracking down on what they see as, infringements on freedom of speech or, failure to control campus protests, failure to encourage ideological diversity, as you mentioned. But certainly, Harvard seems to be the first and one of the few one of these institutions that is actually sort of pushing back and, going to court and actually trying to stand up against the administration for what it sees as unfair attacks.
Harvard is already suing over the $2 billion in funding the Trump administration froze last month. Now the administration is essentially saying, don't bother applying for future funding. Should we expect another lawsuit? And do legal experts think the administration is on solid ground here?
Yeah, certainly I wouldn't be surprised if Harvard, at minimum sort of amends their existing lawsuit to sort of, cite this latest effort by the administration to freeze any new grants or reject any new grants. To add that to their existing lawsuit at minimum to make the case that the administration is sort of unfairly targeting Harvard. Certainly I think the legal community is sort of split here. That certainly there are conservative lawyers who think the administration is on solid ground here to be doing this, to be arguing that these institutions are not entitled to federal funding necessarily, that they have to meet these certain terms, conditions, etc. But there are also lawyers who I think would argue that Harvard has a case here, that it is being specifically targeted, unfairly singled out, etc. So certainly should be interesting to watch as this case proceeds.
Harvard is known as being one of the wealthiest private universities in the country, has like a $50 billion endowment, but it does rely on the federal government for funding research programs. How are actions taken by the Trump administration impacting what happens on campus?
Yeah, certainly. And I think, that gets at one of the arguments from the Trump administration. When they freeze these grants, they make the case that an institution like Harvard has this massive endowment, that it doesn't need to rely on federal funding. So that is certainly part of the argument we've seen from the Trump administration. But certainly, I think Harvard, the fact that they are one of the first and few sort of major institutions standing up to the Trump administration over this, has sort of rallied some folks behind Harvard, rallied some folks to their cause. Certainly I think on campus it is, we've seen the university president doing a lot of, major interviews with major networks. So certainly I think it has had this sort of rallying effect, where Harvard has been sort of at the forefront of this fight against the administration.
I would imagine if there starts being some news articles that are documenting research that's ending in important things like cancer, other diseases, that could end up maybe coming back to bite the Trump administration in a negative way.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think that's something we've seen just with, not specifically freezing research grants for universities, but just more broadly with some of the cuts that the Trump administration has pursued at, the Health and Human Services Department, some of the budget cuts that were proposed in the budget proposal that came out just last week from the Trump administration. The things that often get highlighted are those things that seem to have broad public support, like cancer research, like research for brain injuries, like programs that assist infants and children. Those are the kinds of programs that, when they get cut, when it comes to light, that those are the things that are being affected. Certainly, I think it forces the Trump administration to sort of answer for how it is going about freezing some of these grants.
I want to ask you about what's happening at the University of Washington. Pro-Palestine protesters occupied a building on campus Monday. 30 people were arrested. Yeah, I assume the Trump administration will be watching very closely how the university responds to this.
Absolutely. Part of the predicate for some of the crackdowns that we saw from the Trump administration on these Ivy League schools like Harvard, Columbia, et cetera, was that they failed to properly address these protests against Israel and its war in Gaza, these pro-Palestine protests on campuses. So certainly the Trump administration, I think, is watching this very closely, what happens at the University of Washington. Certainly this is reminiscent of a lot of what we saw during the Biden administration, where you saw students occupying campus buildings, certainly making a big scene on campus to sort of draw attention to their cause, to their concerns about what's happening in Gaza. So, certainly not something that we haven't seen before, but maybe sort of the first big test case for how the Trump administration responds to these sort of very provocative campus protests.
All right, we'll leave it at that. Brett Samuels, thank you.
Thanks, Drew.